revealed the truth about what really went on behind the scenes of the legendary sitcom. For years, fans have speculated about the cast's off-screen dynamics, rumored tensions, and unforgettable moments that never made it to air. Now, Ed is pulling back the curtain, confirming secrets that will leave audiences stunned. What truly happened on set? The answer is more surprising, dramatic, and entertaining than anyone ever imagined. Ed O'Neill finally confirms what happened on Married with Children set for years. Whispers floated around Hollywood about the tension simmering behind the crude laughs and outrageous antics of Married with Children. On screen, the Bundy family thrived on chaos, trading insults and embracing dysfunction like no other sitcom before it. But off-screen, one particular feud seemed to mirror that same stormy energy. Only this time, it wasn't scripted. Ed O'Neill, the face of the show as Al Bundy, has finally hinted at what really unfolded, and his admission sheds light on a rift fans had only guessed at for decades. It wasn't the whole cast at odds, far from it. By most accounts, O'Neill enjoyed warm relationships with his TV family. Katie Sagal, Christina Applegate, and David Faustino have all spoken of the near-instant chemistry they shared. Sagal even recalled how, during the pilot phase, the show tried out other actors as the Bundy children, but the spark wasn't there. It only came alive when Applegate and Faustino stepped in, just before the show's official premiere in the spring. From that moment on, the four of them bonded into a dynamic that carried the series through its 11-season run, ending in 1997. But while that chemistry anchored the Bundys, something far less friendly was unfolding between O'Neill and Amanda Bearse, who played their sharp-tongued neighbor, Marcy. According to O'Neill's own retelling, the hostility didn't start with one explosive moment but built gradually. Their personalities simply clashed. His gruff, no-nonsense approach to the set rubbing against Bearse's increasingly outspoken nature. Eventually, the tension boiled over in a makeup room argument, where both hurled insults until O'Neill snapped, threatening to use his star power to have her removed from the show. In hindsight, he has admitted he regrets pulling rank in that way, but what stands out is that he never expressed remorse for disliking her in general. For him, the animosity was real, not just a product of long shooting days. The divide deepened when Bearse chose to marry during the show's run. She invited nearly every cast and crew member to her wedding, except O'Neill and Faustino. When pressed, she reportedly told O'Neill that she feared he'd laugh as she and her bride walked down the aisle in matching tuxedos. O'Neill swore he wouldn't, though even his attempt at reassurance reportedly came with a smirk he couldn't quite hide. Bearse's exclusion made it painfully clear just how fractured their relationship had become. Fueling speculation further was the question of whether O'Neill's behavior hinted at something deeper. Was he uncomfortable with Bearse's sexuality? She was becoming increasingly open about being a lesbian at the time, and O'Neill himself once admitted that this shift was part of what made their relationship harder. For critics, the irony couldn't be sharper. Years later, he would return to television as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, the patriarch of a family that embraced an openly gay couple at its heart. To a new generation of viewers, O'Neill became a beloved figure precisely for a role that championed acceptance. Yet, despite the feud, the rest of the Bundy cast continued to thrive with him. The on-screen family stayed tight, their bond carrying long past the end of the show. Bearse, however, remained on the outside. And now, with talk of an animated reboot of Married with Children stirring excitement, fans are asking, could this long-standing tension finally be put to rest? Or is the old feud still alive? But before uncovering more of what O'Neill finally confirmed, let's step back and see how this groundbreaking series first took shape. From Steel Mills to Spotlight, the making of Ed O'Neill long before Ed O'Neill became Al Bundy, the frustrated shoe salesman who made audiences roar with laughter, his life looked very different. Born in Youngstown, Ohio, on April 12, 1946, he grew up in a working-class Irish Catholic family whose roots traced back to immigrants who arrived in America during the mid-1800s. The steel mills and construction sites of Youngstown were part of his world from an early age, and by just 14, Ed was already trading textbooks for hard labor, taking jobs in construction before later working shifts in a steel mill. That early grit would follow him throughout his life, even as his path veered from sports to the stage. Football was his first passion. At Ursuline High School, O'Neal built his reputation on the field, and his dedication earned him a scholarship to Ohio University. But life at the university wasn't what he imagined. He majored in history, pledged Delta Tau Delta, and threw himself into campus life, yet his love of sports and parties soon outweighed any commitment to academics. After clashes with his coach and lackluster grades, O'Neal walked away after his sophomore year, already learning that his strong-willed personality could put him at odds with authority. Determined not to quit, he transferred to Youngstown State University, where he once again suited up for football and joined another fraternity, Delta Sigma Phi. On the field, he faced talented opponents, including a rising athlete named Roger Staubach, but his future wasn't destined to be written in touchdowns. Something else was quietly stirring within him. The discipline of football was still there, but the theater program at Youngstown began to capture his attention, pulling him toward a completely different stage. By the time he left the gridiron, O'Neal was exploring roles that demanded more than brute strength. His big break came when he starred on Broadway as a boxer, a performance that blended his athletic background with his growing acting instincts. That role proved fateful. Acclaimed director William Friedkin happened to see him and offered O'Neal a small part in the film Cruising, alongside Al Pacino. It was only a brief appearance, but it marked the moment Hollywood doors began to crack open. More roles followed, each sharpening his craft. He appeared in The Equalizer, a popular crime drama, and took on the role of NYPD Detective Jimmy Popeye Doyle in the television film Popeye Doyle. Though it was a tough act to follow Gene Hackman's iconic portrayal from The French Connection, O'Neal's performance showed he could handle gritty, hard-edged characters with ease. Audiences may not have known it at the time, but he was slowly building the experience that would one day collide with the opportunity of a lifetime. And that's where the story takes its most fascinating turn. From steel mills to football fields, from Broadway stages to crime dramas, every twist of his journey seemed to lead him closer to the role that would define his career. The question now is, how did he get cast in Married with Children? Stay with us to find out. Breaking every rule. The birth of the Bundys from the moment Ed O'Neal began edging closer to television stardom. A very different kind of show was already quietly taking shape. When writers Michael G. Moy and Ron Levitt sat down to create their sitcom, they wanted nothing to do with the polished, picture-perfect families ruling primetime. Audiences were used to the wholesome lessons of The Cosby Show and similar series where every episode wrapped up neatly with warmth and wisdom. But Moy and Levitt were determined to torch that formula. Their project, first jokingly titled Not the Cosbys, would dive headfirst into dysfunction. It would celebrate the flaws of a struggling, lower-middle-class family, using humor that was crude, unapologetic, and sharp enough to make audiences squirm while laughing. What made their vision possible was timing. In the late 1980s, Fox was still a fledgling network hungry to stand out against ABC, NBC, and CBS. Where the established giants saw danger, Fox saw opportunity. Rather than reining in the writers, executives encouraged them to go even further, leaning into innuendo, sarcasm, and situations no other network would dare air. That boldness created the space for a family unlike any other to move into American living rooms. The Bundys. Casting this bizarre clan was critical. For the role of Al Bundy, the bitter shoe salesman with endless grievances, dozens of actors had come through auditions. But in 1986, when Ed O'Neal shuffled into the room, collapsed into a chair, and let out a defeated sigh, an offhand gesture borrowed from a relative, the creators froze. That single sigh captured everything they imagined for Al. Exhaustion, defiance, and just enough comedy to make misery hilarious. They didn't need to see more. In that instant, O'Neal became Al Bundy. The next challenge was Peggy Bundy, Al's lazy yet flamboyant wife. Katie Seagal didn't just walk into her audition. She practically stormed in, wearing a tight, flashy outfit and flaming red hair. She understood Peggy immediately. The woman who teased, nagged, and seduced in equal measure, while refusing to lift a finger around the house. Seagal later admitted she felt the character's rebellious spirit from the start, and that fire turned Peggy into an icon. The kids, however, proved trickier. The original Kelly Bundy, Tina Caspary, filmed the pilot, but never clicked with the rest of the cast. Fox sensed the lack of chemistry and took a risk, bringing in 15-year-old Christina Applegate. Her arrival transformed the role. Christina's mix of innocence and sly humor made Kelly both ridiculous and oddly relatable. A teenager the audience couldn't help but laugh at. She later recalled how quickly she felt at home on set, soaking up the sarcastic atmosphere with ease. Bud Bundy went through similar recasting. Hunter Carson was first chosen, but the chemistry faltered again. Then, 12-year-old David Faustino auditioned and suddenly everything fit. Reading scripts filled with adult jokes made him nervous, but his ability to embrace Bud's underdog energy, awkward, ambitious, always scheming, gave the show its final piece. Beyond the Bundys themselves, the series needed a counterweight. The Neighbors. Amanda Bearse stepped into that role as Marcy Rhodes, the straight-laced foil to AL's cynicism. Her sharp delivery balanced the chaos, while her dynamic with O'Neill brought an extra layer of satire. Bearse later admitted that in the early days, the cast carried a streak of cynicism, but within weeks it transformed into a camaraderie that never faded. Segal recalled O'Neill making her laugh almost immediately, while Applegate described the cast as forming a little family both on and off screen. That instant chemistry, more than any script, gave the Bundys their edge. When the pilot was finally delivered, Fox executives were stunned. They praised the biting humor and undeniable chemistry, but warned that the supporting roles could use more spark. Still, they recognized what they had. A show that wasn't just funny, it was provocative. It didn't hide its rough edges. It dared audiences to be offended. Within only a handful of episodes, Married with Children cemented itself as the anti-sitcom and ignited debates across America. Critics called it crude, parents called it dangerous, and viewers couldn't look away. Fox, once ignored, suddenly had the loudest, most controversial family on TV. As the Bundys tightened their grip on living rooms, the show soon pushed boundaries too far for some. What happened next changed television forever. Keep watching. The scandal that made the Bundys unstoppable in 1989, Married with Children unleashed an episode titled Her Cups Runneth Over. The plot seemed typical of the show's irreverent style. Al Bundy and Jefferson traipsing through lingerie shops, a storyline laced with innuendo, sly jokes, and cheeky visual gags. But within its layers of comedy lay elements that would ignite a cultural storm. A flamboyant gay character wearing a crown, racy banter, and semi-nude scenes that most networks would never have touched. The backlash came quickly, but no critic was louder than Terry Ricalta, a Michigan mother of 4 and sister-in-law to the state's governor. Outraged, she launched what began as a personal crusade but swiftly morphed into a national boycott campaign. Ricalta wrote letters to corporate giants, warning that their advertising dollars were supporting immoral content harmful to families. Her outrage resonated with headlines across the country, and within weeks, blue-chip sponsors including Gillette, Coca-Cola, and Warner Lambert publicly pulled their ads. For Fox, still a newcomer trying to survive against ABC, CBS, and NBC, the fallout was dangerous. The network depended heavily on ad revenue, and losing such high-profile sponsors felt like a direct threat to its future. In an attempt to ease the storm, Fox yanked another episode, I'll See You in Court, from the lineup. That script, which centered on a couple overhearing sexual encounters in a hotel room, was deemed far too risque for primetime television. It wouldn't surface again until years later, and even then in heavily edited form. Inside the production, the pressure was relentless. Ed O'Neill later remembered how every line and every scene suddenly carried weight. The pressure was intense, but I think it made the show sharper. We had to be more creative in how we delivered the laughs. Katie Segal described the atmosphere as one of constant scrutiny, where even a raised eyebrow could be dissected by critics. Christina Applegate, barely 17 at the time, found herself under a blinding spotlight she had never expected. Almost overnight, she was labeled a teenage sex symbol. A status that opened career doors but also invited harsh attention she wasn't fully prepared to face. Yet the irony of the boycott was staggering. Rather than crush the show, it supercharged it. Before the controversy, Married with Children hovered at number 48 in national ratings. By the following seasons, it consistently climbed into the top 50, sometimes higher, and held that ground for years. The attempted censorship had backfired spectacularly, transforming the Bundys from a brash sitcom family into cultural lightning rods. As television critics observed, Ricolta's campaign had created a textbook case of the Streisand effect, where trying to suppress something only amplifies its reach. Fox quickly realized the value of the uproar. Instead of apologizing, the network leaned into the scandal, recasting the series as a sitcom that wasn't meant for every household. It became a sly marketing tool, a badge of honor that separated the Bundys from sanitized TV families like the Huxtables. Viewers who might never have tuned in suddenly wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Ricolta herself later admitted, somewhat bitterly, that while she still disapproved, her campaign had inadvertently turned Married with Children into a household name. The long-term impact was undeniable. Controversial episodes that were later rerun on cable or released on DVD were often trimmed or censored, frustrating die-hard fans who felt the raw edge of the Bundys was being diluted. Still, the notoriety had already done its job. The show had secured its place as a trailblazer, proving that television could thrive by tackling taboos instead of avoiding them. Behind the scenes, success came at a steep cost. Grueling schedules, clashing egos, and private struggles brewed tensions the public never saw. As the Bundys roared on screen, turmoil off camera grew impossible to ignore. What exploded next will shock you, don't miss it. Shadows behind the laughter. One of the earliest fractures came in 1989, when TV Guide released a special issue spotlighting the Married with Children cast. To the shock of Amanda Bearse and David Garrison, who played Marcy and Steve Rhodes, only Ed O'Neill and Katie Sagal were featured on the cover. The exclusion left Amanda feeling sidelined, while Ed chose silence, admitting years later that his lack of protest was a mistake. "I didn't think it would leave such a lasting mark, but it did." Their working relationship grew colder, and by 1993 the rift deepened further. When Amanda married, she deliberately left Ed off the guest list, explaining later that his presence might make others uncomfortable. To Ed, it felt like a personal slight, and in later interviews, he made no effort to hide his bitterness. What began as a professional slight had hardened into a lasting estrangement. But tension was only part of the behind-the-scenes story. Real-life tragedy struck in 1991 when Katie Sagal, then pregnant, lost her baby 7 months into term. The pregnancy had already been written into the show's storyline, with audiences expecting Peg Bundy to welcome a new child. After the devastating loss, the writers had to pivot suddenly. The planned arrival of a Bundy baby was rewritten as nothing more than a dream sequence of AL's, a surreal episode meant to shield Katie from reliving her grief. Later, she described it as the most painful period of her life, though she drew strength from colleagues who quietly rallied around her. The attempt to fill that void the following year only made matters worse. In 1992, writers introduced a new character, Seven, Peggy's young nephew, hoping to freshen the storyline. But fans revolted. Letters poured in, mocking the character as intrusive and out of place. The backlash was so fierce that Seven vanished from the series after just 1 season, with no explanation ever offered on screen. It became one of the show's few creative missteps, a reminder that the Bundy formula was too sharp and distinct to be tampered with. Even on ordinary shooting days, the atmosphere was far from easy. Each episode was filmed in front of a live audience of more than 3,000 people, which guaranteed genuine laughter but also created relentless pressure. Performances had to land on the first try, and the weight of constant scrutiny hung over the cast. Ed O'Neill shouldered much of the physical comedy, often staging pratfalls, mock fights, and exaggerated stunts. Over the years, these left him with a collection of minor injuries, a hidden toll behind Al Bundy's grumbling swagger. For Katie, the emotional weight was heavier still. Returning to the set after her loss required her to step back into Peg's sharp-tongued, sarcastic persona, pretending as if nothing had changed. The contrast between her real grief and her on-screen humor was immense, a balancing act that revealed just how much the actors gave to keep the show alive. And yet, there were moments of genuine warmth amid the strain. Christina Applegate remembered how, despite the constant chaos of filming and the family's dysfunction on screen, the cast often shared real closeness off camera. Still, the grueling schedule, Live audience expectations and constant public attention created cracks that sometimes widened into conflict. The Bundys might have been America's most outrageous TV family, but for the actors who played them, surviving the show demanded far more than just hitting their punchlines. When controversy became the spotlight, what unfolded behind the curtain was only half the story. On screen, the Bundys became lightning rods for debate, spar,